So then we have the debrief. There's always a debrief. And in those days, I was probably an inspector, I don't know. But the superintendent says to me, he says, Lessemun, lad, where did you get that surrender plan? I said, surrender plan. He said, throw your gun out. He said, where did that come from? I said, I was watching John Wayne last night. So that's what they
Welcome to the Cops and Riders Podcast. Your host, Sergeant Patrick O'Donnell, worked the streets in one of the nation's largest police departments for over 25 years. Ride along with O'Donnell and his expert guests as they help you navigate the oftentimes confusing and misunderstood world of law enforcement. O'Donnell and his guests on this show do not represent any law enforcement agency. The content of this show is not meant to be legal advice. If you think you need a lawyer, you probably do.
Hey, Cops and Writers, thanks for being here with us today for another episode of the Cops and Writers Podcast. I'm Patrick O'Donnell, and I'll be your host for today's show. This show is listener-supported, so thanks to all of you who keep the show going. I would especially like to thank those of you who are patrons of the show. Your generosity helps pay for the software, equipment, and my time producing this show. Yes, you too can become a patron for less than a cup of coffee or a pint of Guinness. Just head on over to patreon.com/Cops and Writers. Welcome back for part 2 of my conversation with author and Detective Superintendent Bob Lessemun as we travel across the pond to England and to Turks and Caicos. A little bit about my guest, Robert C. Bob Lessemun, a man who left school at 16 and walked straight into a police career that would span more than a half a century. From uniformed sergeant and ultimately detective superintendent. He built a reputation for tracking some of Britain's toughest cases, murders, international fraud, major drug operations, while pioneering interview and interrogation training that would influence detectives across the UK. This is the story of how a grammar school boy from England became one of the country's most experienced investigators, leading him to Turks and Caicos investigating international drug and money laundering cases. It was a treat chatting with Bob. I hope you enjoy part 2 of my interview with Bob as much as I did.
I said, now, you understand that, don't you? And he said, yeah. I said, because if you come out with a gun in your hand, whether it's loaded or not, we don't know. But I can tell you now, the chances are they're going to take you out. I said, so you do as I tell you and you'll be all right. He said, oh, yeah, okay. He said, so what do? I said, well, throw your gun out and come out after. So he threw his gun out and he went and he walked past the gun and they arrested him and nicked him and took him away. So then we have the debrief. There's always a debrief. And in those days, I was probably an inspector, I don't know. But the superintendent says to me, he says, Lessemun, lad, where did you get that surrender plan? I said, surrender plan. He said, throw your gun out. He said, where did that come from? I said, I was watching John Wayne last night. So I'll give you bloody John Wayne. He said, you never get him to throw the gun out and then walk past that gun. He said, that's not right. I said, well, I don't know. I said, I ain't got a lot of experience in this, so you know. I said, but we got it out, didn't we? He said, yeah, I suppose we did. And then just because I knew he'd done the door. And I said, we all make mistakes, sir. I mean, look at the door on the Range Rover. He said, that's enough. That is enough. Finished. And so that was the end of that one. You've got another one? This was, we were middle of Brum, Friday night, 5:00, busy. Traffic in England is busy, always. It used to take me 40 minutes to get 7 miles to work every day.
Oh.
But honest to God, it was nose to tail all the time. And this was at 5:00 on a Friday night. It's horrendous. And they got a place there, they call it Spaghetti Junction. It's a bit like the interchange where all the roads go all over the place. And I think there's 2 or 3 motorways converge and there's like a spiral of roads and they call it Spaghetti. And right at the top of Spaghetti is this girl who's threatening to jump. And the chief constable himself turned out. And I got there and he said, I'm told you're pretty good with a chat, let's see. I said, well, I'll do my best, you know. I can. He said, well, get up that gun, that ladder there, and get that girl down, and let's get this traffic moving. And I looked at where she was. She was about 60 foot in the air.
Oh boy.
And I said, can I use a megaphone, sir? He said, no, you can't use a megaphone. He said, because you'll be taped and whatever. He said, get up there and do it face to face. So I was scared to death.
Sure.
I'm climbing up this ladder. I get to her. And I got to her and I said, bloody hell, it's you, Betty. She said, not you again. I said, yeah. I said, I done you the other night, 3 days ago, remember? She said, I remember. She said, are you going to be talking and rabbiting to me all night now? I said, yeah, probably. Yeah, I am, yeah. She says, in that case, get me down. And I come straight down. He came straight down. It hadn't gone a minute, 2 minutes, and she's coming down. And the chief says to me, he said, I don't know how you do it, Lessemun. He said, but that was brilliant. I said, it comes with experience, sir. It comes with experience. To this day, he didn't know the truth.
Oh, that's funny.
That I dealt with her 3 days previous.
Oh,
yeah.
my. So, you know, you're still in England. Were there any cases that really stuck with you that you think about often or you thought about quite a bit? And they could be funny, they could be serious, you know, whichever you would prefer to talk about.
Well, you can tell now from our interview today that I do like to have a laugh and I do like to see the funny side of things.
Absolutely.
But there is one case. Well, there's more than one case, but there's one case in particular, which was a child abuse case. And I've dealt with the murders. I mean, I could talk about Carl Bridgewater murder, the Black Panther murder, lots of other murders that I've dealt with, child murder. But this one was the father of 3 girls, of 4 girls actually, but he raped 3 of them from the age of 7. And the one was now 19 or 20, one was about 15 or 16, and the other was 12. And there was one in between who would never, ever disclose what happened to her. But he'd had all 4 without any shadow of a doubt. And I got what they call the child protection team came to me, and I went with them and I arrested him as a detective inspector, and I interviewed him. He really didn't want to know. He wasn't going to have it at any price. And I was a pretty good interviewer, and I can get people. I've never get them to say nothing. I always get them to talk, but whether I can steer them in the right direction, I wasn't going to steer him, and he didn't want to know. And then the superintendent came, and you talked about the change in the police force earlier on.
Yeah.
Well, this was the change when being supervised more closely. And you couldn't have a person in custody more than 24 hours unless it had the superintendent's authority. And he wasn't going to give it me. And I explained to the cases, and he said, yeah. He said, oh, no doubt he's done it. He said, but you've got no corroboration. You've got no supporting evidence. You've got no forensic, and you're not going to get any forensic. He said, and I said, 2 of them have had abortions by him. He's paid for their abortions. He said, do you know where the abortion clinic is? I said, not yet, but I will. I said, you've got to give us time. This is the first thing. And he said, if you haven't got any more evidence by 12 o'clock, you're to release him. I said, you're joking. And he said, no. He said, I'm not going to authorize his detention. So off he went. And I turned to the sergeant and I said, charge him. He said, you've got no evidence. I said, I've got evidence. I haven't got sufficient at the moment, but there's sufficient to charge him. Charge him. And he said, well, I heard what the superintendent said. I said, Sarge, I'm an inspector. You're the sergeant. Do as you're told. Charge him. Station sergeant charged him. And I said, just the one. We'll just give him the one. And then we'll build the case up from there. Superintendent was wicked about it. And I went into the cell area the next day, and he rips his shirt open like this, and he'd had a cigarette, and he burnt innocent across his chest.
Oh,
He burnt it. And he said, look. And he looked at me and I said, you spelt it wrong. There's another N in there. And he said, you bastard. Well, which I was. I don't mind it. But I never let on that I was nasty, because that's the worst thing you can do on an interrogation. But I couldn't get him. But I put the case together, and it was coming together nicely. The case was, I found one girl in London. She'd left home and whatever, and she came and gave evidence and said, what had happened to her. And he used to bang the ceiling, and then they would have to go and do what they had to do. It was a dreadful case. I ain't going to go into the details of that, but It was absolutely dreadful. Then I get the Crown Prosecution Service, which is the district attorney.
Mm-hmm.
And he sends for me. He said, you ain't got enough. I said, we've got enough. I said, we just got to be presented properly, that's all. We just got to present it as evidence of similar facts. And it is evidence of strikingly similar facts. The banging on the door, the way that they have to do it. He said, he said, they'll say it's collusion. I said, well, let them say it's collusion and let the jury decide whether it is collusion or not, or whether they're telling the truth. The girls have got to have their day in court. And he said, no. So I said, okay, get in the car. He said, what do you mean, get in the car? I said, well, you making the decision. You can come and tell the girls.
Yeah.
You can come and tell the girls while you're in charge, And he said, all right, we'll run it. And we run it. And the first time, there was bumps in the road all the way. One girl finished up in the mental hospital. And the day that she was going to give evidence in court, her best friend in the mental hospital committed suicide.
Oh, God.
It was horrendous. And then there was a nasty defense QC, the wig. So we got the wigs on. Mm-hmm. And he had a go at her. And he said, I need her medical record. I need this. I need that. And I said, she had a cold 3 weeks ago. Do you need the other prescription? And I mean, that's how we are. Anyway, so I'm giving evidence in the box. And I said, sir, there's evidence of 16 similar facts here. And the judge, the red cloaked judge, turned around to me and he said, 16? I said, yes, sir. He said, I found 32. I thought, I got the judge on my side. If nothing else, I got the judge. Yeah. So anyway, I looked through the courtroom doors at one stage, because you're not allowed in court, as you know, when you're on a trial, or you're not in England anyway. And the jury were crying, all of them crying. They're listening to this girl's case.
Oh, sure.
And it was so sad. You couldn't help but cry. It was really sad. And we got it. We got the case, 12 years. Then 12 years. He appealed. And he appealed. And the bloke who was defending him was a guy called Michael Mansfield. And if you got 5 minutes, buy his book. Mansfield is #1 lawyer in England at defense. And I'm going to give him his due. He's a good lawyer. I mean, very good lawyer. He's a bit flamboyant, wears red socks and all that nonsense with his wig. But, and he really disliked me. But because I've won a couple of cases against him, but you don't win many, I'll tell you. But so anyway, we go to and he gets him off on appeal.
Oh no!
He got him off on appeal, and the Crown prosecuting lawyer says to me, he said, "Now will you listen to me?" He said, "I told you you've wasted the public funds now, and he's going to be cock a hoop." I said, "We ain't finished yet." He said, "Yes, yeah. It's Court of Appeal. That's the end of it." I said, "There's the House of Lords. We could go to the House of Lords on case stated and change the law." He said, "No. I said, "Yeah, we can. We need to." Anyway, I convinced him it was worthwhile. And he let me choose my own barrister. And I chose a barrister that I just lost to on a murder case. And he came to me and he apologized for winning. So I thought, well, he's a decent guy. So I went to him, and he actually became Lord Chief Justice, I think, of England eventually. But at this time, he was just a young but very good barrister. And we go into the House of Lords. I don't know whether you've been to England, but you got the Houses of Parliament with Big Ben,
Yeah.
and the House of Lords where the big, with the posh people are. I mean, that's where they are. They have this star chamber of judges with all their big long wigs on.
Sure.
And I was there in the middle of the trial, in the middle of the presentation of the case. You see Michael, Lord Ombersley as he is now, turned to me and he said, "You know, I've got tickets for Lords, don't you?" I said, "Well, you're in Lords." He said, "No, I've got the real Lords, the Lords cricket ground. England are playing Australia today and I could have been there and I'm having to do this." I said, "Well, it'll be worthwhile." We won.
Oh, good.
He overturned the case, and it is now the law of the land in England of evidence of similar facts. You can use evidence of similar facts, and that's what changed the law.
Well, good for you.
So that's that one stick. I thought about writing a book just about that, but I get sad when I think about it.
Sure.
Yeah.
So you leave England and you go to the Caribbean. You wind up in Turks and Caicos, which is an English. It's not an English state. What? It's an English territory, correct?
We call it the Pink Bits. The Pink Bits, because when the UK had its empire, which was the biggest empire in the world, they got rid of it all in Africa and India, in Asia, and they're left now with the little pink bits in the Caribbean. There's 6, and there's some little islands dotted here, there, and everywhere. And in the UK, if they could, they would get rid of them, but they can't, and the people themselves can't last. They ain't big enough to stand on their own 2 feet.
Okay.
So they manage them from the UK, and that's what I was doing. I was there. There's 40 islands in the Turks and Caicos Islands, and only about 4 or 5 are inhabited in any shape.
Okay. Well, to me, it seems like a dream come true. Yeah. How did that happen? How did you go from England to Turks and Caicos? What's the craziest thing you saw when you were a cop? My first week on the job, a guy running at me with a butcher knife. He just killed his brother over the last hot dog. That's chapter 1. There are 33 more. Police Stories, The Rookie Years, just launched. Available now on Amazon. Search Police Stories Patrick O'Donnell or click the link in the show notes. Back to the show.
We ain't got all there, we.
No, we don't.
I was going to be a veterinary inspector, and I put a report into the chief saying, "Can I have 3 Saturdays off after 32 years? Can I have 3 Saturdays off to teach so that I can be taught how to become a veterinary inspector?" And the assistant chief constable came back and he said, "No, we might bring the force into disrepute." I thought, what's he talking about? You can't even be sued as a veterinary. Betting games, you can't be sued. It's that's why they have veterinary inspectors. But anyway, you can't argue with them. That was it. So I was really, really, really pissed off with it. So I looked at the thing, and there was this advert for a superintendent, head of CID, Turks and Caicos Islands. So I put in for it. And when I put in for it, remember I told you that I taught interview techniques. Well, I used the interview techniques on the interview course when I was interviewed by them. And one of the things you can do is you can use, you'll know this because you've done it as an investigator. You might not have realized you're doing it sometimes, but if you know what you're doing, you can really do it. You say, "Yes, sir, and I think it's really important to be a good manager." And you know the next question, "Well, what do you mean by a manager?" So you got that next answer ready, and then you say something else. You need to be able to read people. Read people? What do you mean read people? So you say, "Oh, you just style accordingly, blah blah," and you give them the word, and then they give it you back because they haven't prepared for their interview. You give them the interview subject, and they give it you back. And that was brilliant. I had this really good interview. There were 68 applicants, and I got the job. And I wasn't. You think of this. I was 30 years service. So I was due retirement. I was due retirement in a matter of weeks. And they gave me promotion to superintendent, which is a really big chunk of change for my pension.
Yeah.
So I get a nice rise to become a superintendent and a lifetime rise in my pension. And I mean, it was like my birthday. And then when I got to the Turks and Caicos Islands, I didn't even know where it was. I didn't. I had to go to the library to find out where it was. And I got the job, and I finished it with Providenciales Airport, and I've been traveling first class all the way, and but I got there, and it's a little, I think an 8 or 10 seater plane, and I thought, oh God, I don't fancy this. And anyway, I got in the back of the plane, and it was the only time I ever was allowed to fly in the back, because the fat ones have to fly in the middle. You can't fly at the back. So this guy says to me, he says, "You be Bob Lessemun then?" I thought, God, I'm 4,000 miles from home and he knows who I am. I said, yeah, Bob Lessemun. I said, who are you? He said, I'm a park superintendent. Well, I've done enough research by then to know. I said, there ain't any parks. There's no parks in the Turks and Caicos. It's all scrubland. He said, the underwater parks, the diving. And I thought, that showed your ignorance, Leslie. I didn't even know they had this diving. Beautiful, beautiful place to be.
Sure.
And he said to me, and he turned to me and he said, you're either a born adventurer or stark raving mad. Which is it? And for the rest of the journey, I thought, well, I ain't a born adventurer, so I must be stark raving mad. But I had 2 years of the best years of anybody could have. It was fabulous. And I would say this to you: if you like the podcast, get me back, and I'll tell you because it'll take a podcast to tell you about the Turks and Caicos, but it was fabulous. I had some really good drug busts, human trafficking, money laundering, burials at sea. The burials at sea, the 2 burials I had at sea, I guarantee I could get you thinking about how they went. It's just a great time. If you want, I'll tell you about one now.
Sure.
You want? You sure?
Yeah, why not?
All right. Right. This was, I'll tell you the second one because it's the shorter one of the two.
Okay.
A young kid, 23, British kid from Burnley, and he was on one of these multi-million or billion, I don't know, yachts. Off, and he was coming into Providenciales. They had their own helicopter pad on the boat. That, you know, can you imagine the sort of thing we're talking about? These big Bezos type boats. Well, he was a crew member of that, and they got this machine, this like James Bond machine, which fitted on his back as a backpack on his back, and he could then become a one-man helicopter.
Okay,
and,
sure.
And that's what he was doing. He was going. He was the helicopter, and he was going around the boat and back onto the boat. But then the silly sausage, and I don't mean to be rude to him because he's dead now, but he went over land and it stalled, and he died. He went smack, hit the ground and died. That was the end of it. So I contacted his dad in Burnley, and his dad says, well, we can't afford to send him back, bring him back. We can't afford to. He said, it's thousands of dollars. He said, we ain't got any money. We're on the dole.
Sure.
We're on the social. He said, is there anything you can do? I said, well, we can put him in a pauper's grave. I said, but he won't be lasting very long because with this heat, he'll be rotten in a week and God. I said, but and it'll be an unmarked grave in the thing. He said, I don't really want that. I said, well, there is another thing we could do. We could do a burial at sea. And I said, we got the Navy launch, and we got a flag, and we got a vicar. And I said, and we'll take him out 7,000 feet Columbus Passage, and we do a ceremony for him, and we'll bury him at sea. He said, would you mind doing that? And he said, I said, no. I said, I can't guarantee it because I ain't spoken to the Navy yet and I ain't spoke to anybody. I said, but
Right.
I said, I'll do what I can to make it happen. He said, that's really kind of, he said, what I'd really like to do, he said, I'd really like to do a simultaneous service. So as we're doing a service in the UK at the same time as you're doing the burial at sea. And I said, well, I'll go along with that. I said, but the problem, I said, that's okay. We'll be all right doing that. But I said, but I don't want to be saying timing and all. I said, but we'll do our best. He said, okay, great. So we fixed it up. So I go back and I said to the commissioner, he said, all right to do it better at sea. He said, oh no, Bob. He says, you can't do it better at sea. I said, why not? I said, I know it's happened before. He said, well, you know what happened on the last one? I said, no. He said, well, I'll tell you, it was before you was here. He said, but he said they took the coffin out onto the Columbus Passage, pushed it into the water, and it was floating. The coffin was floating. I said, you're joking. I said, they didn't weight it down. He said, no, they didn't weight it down. He said, then they got the inspector got his gun out and went, shot the coffin and put holes in the coffin, which give it the holes. And that's how he got buried. He said, and that's you weren't supposed to laugh. Well, but it gets hard not doing it sometimes. But anyway, that's what happened. And he's thinking, only a police officer finds that funny, you know.
Oh,
if
yeah.
I tell that story anywhere
Absolutely.
else, oh God. Anyway, so he said, so a superintendent has to supervise it. So he said, if you want to supervise it and it's got to be in your own time, he said, okay. I said, great. So I'm a little bit worried now because I don't want this body floating.
Right.
So I go up to the scrapyard and I found an old rusty old truck, and I got the guy in the thing to cut the spring off this vehicle, and I got the spring underneath his back right the way down, and I wired the spring onto him. So he was very, very much no coffin. Couldn't
So he was
afford it.
nice and heavy then. Yeah.
He was nice and heavy. And
Yep.
then I wrapped him in a sheet, an old sheet that we got. And we only had one flag on the island. That was at the governor's house. So I borrowed that. He wasn't very happy when he found the Union Jacket was missing. But I was going to ask him, but he wasn't about, so probably playing golf. But sorry, but anyway, we took the flag and we put that around him, and we organised this burial at sea. And I'm driving up towards South Base, and as I'm driving up there, I can hear this singing, "Amazing Grace, oh God, our hope in ages past." And I'm thinking, they ain't started without me, and they ain't at sea. What are they doing? And I'm thinking like somebody's holding a service, and I ain't even a present yet. And I was 5 minutes, 10 minutes before time, which is pretty good in the Turks and Caicos because they're always half an hour late.
Okay.
But that's another story. Island time, they call it. But yeah, honestly, if you're on a meeting, you always have to put half an hour before. Anyway, you find that it did become a habit. But there we are. Anyway, so I get to the boat, and they've done the boat out of spewing, and this Union Jack, and they got a door from somewhere, and they put this purple material on the door, and with him wrapped in the sheet, and then covered in the flag. It looked really good. I got a picture. I'll send it to you.
Yeah.
It looked good. And I said, I've got him board. I said, come on, lads. There's these 5 black expat some are from Jamaica, some from Trinidad, and they were on the boat. And I said, what's with this singing? And one of them said, Sir, I got a son this kid's age.
Ah,
He said, and we think we should be able to give him a send off. And we want to give him a good one. He said, so we ain't much in the way of church stuff. So we were practicing. So as when the vicar come, we'd do him a good job. I said, well, that's really, really. He said, no. He said, it's the least we can do. And you start to think, well, all the racism and everything else, okay, when it matters, people care. People do care.
they do.
And
Yes.
I felt really good about that. So I said, good lad. So I said, well done. I said, now when we get when we ain't got a shoot, we ain't got a thing. So we got 3 each side the door, and we gradually put from 45 up to 90 degrees, and
Sure.
he'll go straight in with that spring. And the sergeant goes, sir, I think we ought to tell you, you need to have a look at that spring. I said, well, what's you can't see it. He said, no, sir, but you can imagine it. I said, what do you mean imagine it? He said, come and have a look. So he takes the flag off, and in between his legs was like the spring had come up through this guy's legs. It looked as though he got an erection. I said, I said, I see what you're saying. Well, put the flag back over, and we use that as a hook for the wreath, because we've got a nice wreath. I said, look, we'll put the wreath there, and it'll be good. It'll stay in. The wreath one going out first.
Oh my!
And we did the burial, and I got the local Anglican vicar to do it, and he was out doing the final speeches. He's the father, the son, and up came they did all the singing and whatever, and just as he was just about to put him in the water, flying fish came out of the water. I'm telling you, if I could have wrote the script, you couldn't have ripped. Flying fish came out of the water, and he went gone. And the Anglican vicar said to me, he said, I'm a bit concerned. He had the father, he had the son. He said, but he went before I had a chance to say Holy Ghost, so I'm hoping that's all right. I said, I'm sure it will be, vicar. It will be all right. But anyway, I took some pictures and sent them off to his dad and whatever. They had the simultaneous thing.
Oh.
And he wrote back to me. He wrote me a letter. And it was one of the nicest letters that I've ever received in my life. And it basically, he said, thank you. He said, thank you, but I don't want to. I did have the letter, but I couldn't read it if I tried. But yeah, he was really grateful for doing that. And so sometimes as a cop, you can do good things, and you can do things that
absolutely
people really, really appreciate. And that was a good thing.
Okay.
Sorry, go on.
No, let's switch gears a little bit. With all of your knowledge and experience, what advice do you have for, police officers today in the USA or any part of the world, really?
Well, I would say the first 3 letters, 3 words of the police training manual is what you need. And that says to be firm, to be fair, and to be friendly. And never forget the friendly, because you catch more flies with honey than you do with vinegar. And if you can talk your way, as we've been talking today, if you can talk your way out of it, that's the better way. I'm really proud of the fact that I never lost one on hostage negotiations. I lost some in the interrogation. I didn't get every interrogation that I wanted. But I think if you're firm, fair, and friendly, most cops can be firm. Most I think are probably fair, but they're not always friendly. And that's an important thing. All 3 are important. And then from a management point of view, I'd say be flexible and be prepared to alter your attitude depending on what you're dealing with. Sometimes you need to be firm and dogmatic. Other times, you need to just listen, and don't be afraid to listen. It ain't a crime to listen to people, and a good listener is important.
So, what would your advice be to leadership? Chiefs, superintendents, sheriffs. What do you think makes an effective leader in police work?
The ability to be able to change your style dependent on your circumstances and
Okay.
dependent on the people,
Yeah.
and to be able to read a situation and read and act accordingly. That is paramount in my book.
Okay. Now, what do you see as major deficiencies in modern police work today?
I think it's a lack of contact with the people that we serve. I think that's the biggest thing for me is we don't understand we police with the consent of the public, and we need to be. It needs to be a partnership between you as a police force, a very thin blue line, particularly in England, and the public, and you're better to be working with them than against them because you'll never win otherwise.
Yeah, I agree. That has to be the way it is. And in America, depending on the department, and we have severe staffing shortages right now.
Yeah,
Just it's severe. And the difference between, I started in 1995 and I retired in 2020, we had beat men. We'd have beat cops. And I thought they were fantastic. But when the dispatcher is backed up 80, 90, 100 assignments, you can't afford to have beat men out there. You have to be responding to 911, calls for service. So, it's that balance that's really tough. And if you don't have the bodies, man, they're gonna have to start getting creative. They're gonna have to do something to, have more cops out there.
but I couldn't agree more. And I told you that when I started, there was a shortage when I started. There's always been a shortage of police officers, and
Sure.
but I think it's probably acute now. And the real sad thing is, the more you can police with less police officers, the easier it is to manage your budget because you don't have to dish the money out.
Oh,
But
you're right. Yeah.
I mean, some of the fights I had to pay overtime, oh God, terrible. But that's it's some writer they can't say we support the police and then they don't give them the resources to do it.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So, what do you miss most or least about being in law enforcement?
The colleagues, the
Sure.
colleagues. I mean, when I left the police force, I never contacted Bobby for 5, 10 years because I'd left England, I'd come to America, and I didn't want to go on the internet. I didn't want to go Facebook and all that. So I tended to shut myself off from it, and I missed him. I
Sure.
missed. I missed. There's a camaraderie that you can't explain. They call it a brotherhood. I don't know what you call it, but I know it's the same the world over. I know that if I go and speak to a cop, I'll be getting on with him. Even if I'm doing defense work, which is what I was doing in America, I never had any hassle with cops that I dealt with, and but I do miss it. I do miss that's the part I miss. But with the internet and with the Facebook, yeah, I can still contact them. Do I'm I'm going to have a dabble at doing a podcast myself.
Oh, there you go. Look at you.
I am, yeah. I don't know. I mean, I got a I got an agreement uh, from a lord. He's a lord. In fact, he was my chief constable. He's agreed to be interviewed, and he said, "Do I need to have a lawyer present?" I said, "Probably," but but he was a great chief, and
Sure.
I'm going to interview him.
So, you know, That sounds very interesting, but you've been writing books, the plod books. Can you explain? Well, first off, what is a plod?
A plot is a slow policeman. It comes from Enid Blyton children's books, and they got Noddy and Big Ears, and the cop is PC Plod, and he's always slow and whatever. And the reason I call them the Plod books is because I don't like to think of myself as slow, and I certainly didn't like being called Plod. And one gentleman decided to do that, and he called me Plod. His name was Onions. He tried to convince me it was O'Nions, but I kept telling him O'Nions is not planted in my garden; they're onions, and that was because he called me Plod. But he gave me the runaround. He said I wouldn't understand the case, and I finished up going to Italy, Denmark, Ireland, Holland, probably Scotland, all over the place.
Yeah.
But I got him. I got him in the end. I got him, and he got 4 years. And I made sure that when the jury found him guilty, that when he turned, he would be looking directly at me. And as he looked directly at me, I'd just give him a little wink. And I went to see him down in the cells, and he said, "Leslie, the biggest mistake I ever made was calling you Plod." He said, "When I saw your face," he said, "I knew I was going to jail." I said, "Well, there you are. Enjoy your 4 years." And so when I started, I thought, I was a young Plod. I was a little bit slow. I couldn't drive or whatever. So I called it the young Plod. But then I just carried on, and then I went private and been a private investigator, and then Plod Goes to Paradise, and I got this latest one out called Plod's Final Murder, and I wish we'd have got a chance to have gone on with that one, because that is a great story. The final, yeah, I think it's a great story. It's only a short story, but
yeah, we got the young Plod, Tales from the Black Country, Plod Goes Private, Tales of a Private Investigator, and Plod Policing Paradise, Tales from the Caribbean. So those are the Plod books. And where can we find those books? Are they on Amazon or where?
Amazon, Kindle.
Okay.
And I think one or two of them might be free at the moment if you got that bundle thing. But
yeah.
But yeah, you can get them on Amazon.com or Kindle. Yeah.
So are you going to keep writing, or are we done?
I was going to call it quits, but I dealt with 10 or more, might be 15, but certainly 10 capital murder cases, and some really, really serious stuff.
Yeah.
And there's some interesting stories amongst those. I've dealt with another load of stuff, load of murders as a detective, inspector, and chief inspector, which I haven't written about. I've got Guantanamo Bay cases that eventually I'll be able to talk about. I can't talk about them yet, but I will be able to. And so, yeah, I love writing. I love to just. I'm not a writer. I'm a storyteller. That's what I thought.
Yes, you are, and you're very good at it, I think. But you know what? Let's wrap this up. Let's land the plane. We've been doing this for a while here. The name of the books is The Young Plod, Tales from the Black Country, Plod Goes Private, Tales of a Private Investigator, and Plod Policing Paradise, Tales from the Caribbean. Bob, this has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I've really enjoyed it.
Thanks, everyone, for coming back for the conclusion of my conversation with British and Turks and Caicos retired Detective Superintendent Bob Lessemun. Thank you, Bob, for being on the show. Well, that wraps up another episode of the Cops and Writers podcast. If you haven't done so yet, can you take a minute and rate and review the show on Spotify or Apple Podcasts? If you have already, thank you. As always, thank you for all of your support. And, of course, let's be careful out there.